Hey, I'm Taylor Dorsett, and this is the Professional Technical Interviewee. Technical interviews are hard, and every company does them differently. On this show, I interview engineering leaders to see what they look for in technical candidates, and then they perform a real technical interview with me. My guest today is Sean Wolter. He's currently an engineering director at ActiveCampaign and previously worked at SpotHero, Belly, and Vokal here in Chicago. We talk about his interviewing advice, he breaks down what he's looking for in a potential hire, and in the technical, we talk about how to build a Slack coffee application. Hello, Sean. Thank you for being on the show and welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. To introduce you, Sean, you are my guest today, currently the engineering director at ActiveCampaign. You've previously been in director and VP roles at Belly, SpotHero, Vokal here in Chicago, and I think you're a little bit of a notorious LinkedIn troll in Chicago.
Well, I don't know about notorious, but I take a lot of pride in my LinkedIn profile. I think it's important to carry your brand through to the professional social network.
Sure. It keeps it enjoyable for all the those of us in the recruiting world who are used to the same stuffy profiles over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Great. Well, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your team here at ActiveCampaign and what you currently do?
Yeah, for sure. So historically, I got my break at Vokal, which is a digital agency here in Chicago. I was there at the right place, right time. iPhone was blowing up. And I was a mobile developer, and then I got into leadership, led a lot of engineering there. So mostly I was in mobile through Belly, SpotHero. I came to ActiveCampaign, and my first mission, my call to action as I joined, was to scale out, build the mobile teams. And then over time, I've grown to lead the teams that are built on top of our customer experience automation platform. So not the core functionality, but apps, our Chrome extension, Outlook add-in we just launched, sort of vertical experiences and onboarding experiences, and front-end focused experiences on the platform. So keeps me very busy, working with about 4 or 5 teams now.
Oh wow!
And it's been a wild ride. ActiveCampaign's been very good to me.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And just for people who don't know, ActiveCampaign is it's primarily like email marketing automation type software.
Yeah. We our big break was email marketing, but the real value, if a customer gets in there and sees the power of our automations, I mean, we can automate the entire customer experience. We integrate with everything, orchestrate everything, soup to nuts. So from marketing to sales to support, it's the entire customer experience. Automation is our pitch and what customers love from us.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Great. Well, I know it seems like ActiveCampaign has grown quite a bit. I'm curious, and your teams in particular probably have grown as well. Have you been doing technical interviews lately for your team or teams?
Yeah, most definitely. We to give you a sense of the scale, I joined as ActiveCampaign employee 230 something. I can't remember exactly, and we're crossing 850 right about now.
Wow.
We should be on track to have about 1,000 employees by the end of this year, 2021. And engineering has grown from about 35, 40 people when I joined to I think a little north of 200 total in tech and product.
Wow.
So I've been doing a lot of hiring. All of engineering leadership has been trying to scale out our hiring efforts. So firsthand and secondhand, been doing a lot of technical interviewing.
Yeah, and you've been there 3 years or so now?
Yeah, a little more than 3 years, three and a quarter, looking at the calendar.
Yeah, that's a lot of growth. I mean, that's a huge number of people.
Yeah, most definitely. The maybe this is a little tangential to technical interviewing, but in growing the engineering teams in general, I'd like to say that it was intentional. We've sort of scaled and refactored. So every year we would have a large glut of hiring, and then we would sort of get our feet under us, calm down a little bit, and then the next year we would hire again. And even through the pandemic, we paused a little at the beginning of COVID and made sure everything was still safe and our business was still growing. But then after that, yeah, immediately got back to it, scaled up, recuperated, and now we're in our next big push.
Yeah. When you say like recuperate, do you mean basically making sure all the people that have been on board are actually, training and actually functioning well, and you're able to make sure everyone's kind of operating at the level kind of expected when they were hired for?
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. I should take nothing for granted. Much like technical systems, if you put them under strain, if you scale a technical system, a software system, you'll find rough edges, you'll find problems, you'll find, you'll learn stuff. Similarly with org charts and processes and cultures, we bring all these people on board, and it points out opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, I found often in my recruiting career that it was after someone had done that scaling and tried to refactor a couple of times, they realized, oh, we need a system in place for this, or when we need to hire 25 people, right? Because we can't do what we did last time again, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's that's a tough realization, but it's valuable to realize that like what helped us to scale previously is not going to get us to that next level. We need to systematize it, make it into a real process so we can repeat it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that note, what are you typically evaluating for when you're in technical interviews for your team in particular?
I'm glad you asked this question, because I love to get on a soapbox about this. My peers at ActiveCampaign, I won't speak for them, but I'm fairly certain that they agree with me. We are, of course, looking for a baseline competency in a software engineer. Like, you should be able to deliver code relative to the expectations of the job. But we're really looking for, once we get past that baseline, for traits and values. So skills can be learned. I hope that anyone can pick up a new language, a new technology, a new framework. But what's much harder to train is certain traits, certain values. Do you care about the customer? Are you iterative and collaborative? Are you humble? For lack of a better word, do you want to collaborate with people? Are you excited about what we're doing? All these things are not strictly technical, but through the course of our technical interviews, we try to get to those traits. And at least for my teams, I'll be straightforward with candidates up front, and I'll say, listen, the exercise is, XYZ, but what we're testing for is how you collaborate with the team. That is what we're actually evaluating here. And hopefully it goes well.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the companies that I think of some of the strongest cultures that I'd worked with in the past were companies that truly cared, maybe not 100% equally, but it seemed like the decision was pretty even of technical competency and culture fit, culture add, like basically being able to work well with this person, right? And I think a lot of times that comes down to having some type of no assholes policy, right? Like, you can be the greatest engineer in the world, but if all the engineers on the team aren't going to enjoy working with you, then you might actually end up being a net negative, right? Versus someone who needs a little bit more time to ramp up, but they actually help the team as a whole, then it makes a lot more sense to take a risk on that person, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you encapsulated it great there. I've asked, am I allowed to ask you a question? Maybe
sure,
hypothetically, because I've asked this internally. Hypothetically, if somebody had no skills, but they lived our values, they were perfect culture add, they brought you a new perspective, and they were excited as hell, would you hire that person? Conversely, if somebody had all the skills in the world, but was the worst human being on earth and was a true just sort of mercenary, and you hated working with that person, would you hire that person?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. And I think to some extent, the culture of apprenticeship programs and even boot camps come out of that mindset, right? Of if often apprenticeship programs at companies that have kind of developed a pipeline through that, they're looking at either bootcamp graduates or even people that are self-taught or have very little actual technical skills that otherwise match up very well with what they're looking for, right? All those skill sets. And that's something that I think takes a lot of time and effort, right? You really have to focus on building that. But some companies have great success through that, and that has become their entire early career hiring pipeline, right? And then those types of people, you get them internally, and I think there's a little bit more, maybe, I don't know if gratitude is the right word, but maybe you almost feel like I want to stay with this company longer than I might otherwise, because, they helped me come from very little skill set to, now I'm a mid-level engineer who's able to make a good living, right? And that's something I think is valuable for companies to try to foster.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it might, I don't want it to sound too cynical or capitalistic, but like as a manager, if you can grow with somebody and there's that feedback, that reward cycle where somebody, the company invests in them and they invest in the company, it's a great thing. It works out better for everybody.
Yeah,
More buy-in, more excitement, more everything. Yeah.
absolutely. So you mentioned there's kind of specific traits you're looking for. Do you have a standardized system that you use when you're interviewing to try to make sure that you're evaluating for that, or does it change depending on the role and the individual?
A little bit of both. Uh, we've tried to work with our talent acquisition partners and the HR team to develop a baseline. So at the worst, as it were, a candidate will go through a process that meets a minimum sort of level of quality for senior engineer, sort of mid-level engineer, sort of entry-level engineer.
Mm-hmm.
But the best managers take that baseline and then augment it to make sure that they're finding someone that's the best fit for their team. So at a minimum, there's a rubric for the interview, but currently one of my teams is very specifically looking for a senior engineer that has certain architectural skills and language skills, because we need somebody that has walked this path before, that can help us to help the mid-level engineers on the team to really just, get to that next level. So in that case, we have a very specific rubric in terms of traits and technical skills that we're looking for that team.
Yeah. Great. And you mentioned earlier when we were speaking, you also have kind of a process of kind of a conceptual interview and then a take-home interview potentially. Can you walk me through the interview process in general?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll try, because it differs from team to team. So I'll try to I'll start with the baseline and then talk about some of my team's sort of specialization. So the standard process would be an engineer is either approached by recruiting, talent acquisition, or applies. They look interesting. There'll generally be a phone call. And then that first technical screen would be a HackerRank quiz. And I know firsthand and secondhand that quizzes can be scary. That test anxiety is a real thing. I've seen incredible engineers that have decades of experience just completely fall flat when they're given a timed quiz. So I totally understand that it's fraught. So we try to make it, and I tell candidates in the phone screen, like, we're trying to make this as chill as possible. There's no time limit. There's no tricks. If you see anything weird, it's not meant to mess you up. Like, it's probably our mistake if you see anything weird. So please just tell us how it's going. Just communicate. Like, we want you to succeed. We're looking for you to go to the next step. We're not looking for reasons to turn people down. So we do our best to make this quiz, which has, depending on the level, a language challenge, a SQL challenge, or I think it's 2 language challenges and a SQL challenge now. So try to make it as easy as possible without, completely giving it away. And then from there, in the standard process, a candidate will talk to the team about some of this code that they wrote in the HackerRank. And best case, it's a collaborative discussion about, like, if this was a product, how might you make it better? If it was more than just a quiz, if you actually wanted to query these things and visualize them in some way. How might you approach that? And then there's a second interview unrelated to that code challenge, which is conceptual. Given a something like a product brief, make a thing that does something. You talk about how you would approach it, collaborate with some of our senior engineers to figure out what the architecture would look like, poke some holes in it, figure out edge cases or problems to be aware of. And like I said, and I'll probably say a million times more, excuse me, through all that, we're looking for the traits more than the perfect answer. Because again, we know that like in an interview setting, there's a lot to be anxious about. So we just want somebody that's gonna collaborate, be curious, be humble, have good ideas and be able to brainstorm to figure something out.
Yeah.
So that's the baseline for most teams that I work with. But with some teams that are a little more front end focused, and the mobile teams, we've gone back and forth on this. Instead of the hacker rank, we'll offer a take home exercise, which is, I hope, again, pretty chill. It's hit an API and then visualize that stuff. And in the prompts, it'll say we don't want this to be the best code. It doesn't have to be production ready. You can write tests or not write tests. Like, just get the information and visualize it on screen so it looks like this. And in the front end case, it says it very explicitly, we are looking for you to match the design spec above all. Don't have to worry about any features. Just pull the first page, do this. On the mobile app, it's saying, we just want you to get the information on screen. Don't worry about the design. So ideally, the candidate does this in a couple hours, invests that time, and then comes in. And in the on-site interview, or I guess it's not on-site, it's a virtual, in the discussion interview, the team talks to the candidate about how they would take what they had, this trinket, this novelty, this little challenge, and then do something to it. So sometimes it'll be, could you add pagination to it? Could you add sorting and filtering? Hey, what if the designer came in and said, oh, I want this all to be blue instead of red, or something like that? Yeah. And as I said, I'll repeat myself, what we're looking for is traits and values, because nobody's going to get the perfect answer. But if a mobile engineer or a front-end engineer can just talk about it and collaborate and get along with the person, then that goes a long way. that was a lot. There's a lot to interviewing. I realize as I'm talking through it.
Yeah, no, I mean that's great insight though, and I think something that's so critical is if you're doing some type of take home or some type of hacker rank, actually using that code later in the process, right? Having a conversation about that code, I feel like makes someone who's interviewing much more interested in actually doing that challenge, right? Instead of just, this is an arbitrary bar, I have to jump over to basically start interviewing. This is something that I'm doing that then is part of the interview process later, right? Which I think is, I don't know, a much better situation. It feels much better when you're interviewing, right? Because that code actually feels worthwhile versus just, let me make sure I pass the hacker rank, pass fails test cases that are in there so I can move on to actually talk to someone.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure you and I both have had those where it's just throwaway, just homework. Yeah, it's like, why are you making me jump through these hoops? Does this have any actual values? Does it have anything to do with what the work is? Or is this just a test, a hoop to jump through?
Yeah, it's gonna say, this can be your soapbox. This podcast doesn't need to be my soapbox, but I could go on for hours about how people saying, oh, it's only an hour take home. And I'm like, where am I going to find that hour?
Yeah, exactly.
I gotta find this hour to then maybe spend more hours talking. But I guess on that note, it's probably been a while since you were actually doing technical interviews yourself. But how do you feel you did a technical interviews in the past when you were in more of a traditional individual contributor role, or where you were writing more code day to day?
Oh boy, I've got some stories. None of them, I'm not the hero in any of them. I probably didn't do well. I think that's the short way to do it, to summarize it. Like I remember, I think I can say now because it's been long enough. Like I years and years ago, I applied to work at Groupon
Mhm.
uh, in the mobile team, and I had an okay interview. It went okay with the sort of product and design and other engineers and the sort of more social, but the technical one was very sort of quizzy. The
Yeah.
engineer at the time was like, "Well, tell me about how does an array work?" I'm like, okay, are you talking about an NS array or a core foundation or just like an array conceptually? And she's like, "Oh, I don't know, whichever one you want." I'm like, "Okay, so I'll talk about NS array. You asked for trivia. I'll tell you how Apple's frameworks work."
Hmm.
And then she's it you know the follow up. I remember this is burned into my mind. The follow up was like, which data structure uses the most memory? And I was like, I don't know where to begin with that. Like what? Like I don't want to be difficult, and I felt bad because I was like, I don't want to be difficult, but like my understanding of NSArray is that behind the scenes, Apple optimizes that and uses 3 different actual data structures to back the object and blah 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 and all this like technical minutia nobody cares about. And she was just
Uh-huh.
like, just say array, just say array. I was like, oh, okay, all right. So, but the punchline to this is after all this that didn't go very well, the recruiter called me up and said, your interview went okay on average. One of their super senior, their staff engineers would like to talk to you and do an exercise. I said, okay, sounds good. I'm very excited about this opportunity. I'll talk to the staff engineer. And I get on a video chat with the staff engineer, and he says, all right, we're going to go through this exercise. No Googling. Please share your screen. It should be pretty straightforward. And then we'll talk about the company right after that. All right, cool. He he says, again, burned into my memory. He says, uh, given a binary number, what bitwise operation would you use to count the ones in that binary representation?
Whew.
Obviously, you know this off the top of your head, Taylor.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I was like, I'm so sorry. I don't want to be difficult, but do you do this often? Do you
Uh-huh.
find yourself like using a bitwise operator to count ones? Because I can Google it right now and do it. I have done binary operations, but off the top of my head, I don't know. And he's like, well, let's
Yeah.
just talk about it. And I'm like, it's a one line thing. What is there to talk about? And obviously, I didn't get that job, but this stands out as the worst of the worst, where I was a jerk about it. And they wanted somebody that was going to, like we said, jump through the hoops. And I don't, if this is what you're looking for, I don't think I'm a fit. Cause like, I'm just not going to do this.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I used to say very often about like, the FANG type companies, right? Really large companies that have these incredibly difficult interview processes. They're often not actually looking for the best engineer. They're looking for the best engineers who will spend the time to dedicate towards learning their interview process,
Exactly.
studying and prepping to actually pass those interview processes, right? Because that shows a certain level of, I don't know, I want to be here-ness, right? Versus just great engineer who might go there for a little while and then leave because they realize there's some other company that will actually probably pay them more or let them do something interesting when they realize the job, all this crazy prep work you did is just to do the same type of job you were probably doing somewhere else, right? So
Exactly.
I don't know if Groupon was in that same category at some point, but maybe.
Yeah. No shade to Groupon. I'm sure they should be selective. But yeah, I have the same sentiment. I've never gone through an interview round with the FANG organizations, but friends of mine that work at Facebook and Apple or have worked there talk about the same thing. You go. It's like SAT prep. It doesn't matter about the actual information. What matters is you pass the test,
Yep.
and it shows that you can pass the test. And then once you're in, you're in. It's great. I hope.
Yeah.
But it's less about like the actual skills and more about the test.
Mm-hmm. So you feel great about interviews that you've done in the past, right? The long and the short of it.
Yeah. The I don't want to go off off the rails too much, but just interviews in general. I mean, you know better than me. You're in the biz. Interviews in general are so inaccurate, sort of like arbitrary. Sometimes you have a good interview and it's for no reason, and the team all says like, "Oh, I like that person," and like, well, but can they do the job? I don't know. Sometimes you're wrong. Sometimes you're right. You try your best. Years ago, I hired a guy that, for all that we could see, couldn't actually write any code. And we did not put him through a technical challenge. We just sort of talked about all the things he had done, and without an exercise, he showed up, and then he didn't deliver anything for a month, and we had to let him go. Again, this was like 4 or 5 years ago. But it was so, and then at that point I was like, well, okay, we should probably do some test, but like, you don't want to make a test that's testing the wrong thing. You don't want to make a test that's hard for its own sake. You don't want to, like, anyway, that's just, interviews are tough, is what I'm saying.
I had a job for a long time solely based on the fact that hiring is hard, right? So yeah, absolutely. Do you, when you're in a situation like that story you shared of maybe there's a technical problem you really don't even know how to approach, or something that's just difficult, do you have any type of system that you use to try to maybe find somewhere to start or to break down that question?
I don't have a system, or if I do, it's not a satisfying system, because when I'm the interviewer, I would always like somebody to be, as I think I mentioned earlier, curious, humble, interested. So I when I found myself in technical interviews in the past, I would try to do that. I know, even as I think it was a manager role. I interviewed for a manager role at a small company here in Chicago a while ago, and they had a architecture discussion. And they were talking about, I can't even remember the database, but it was some database that wasn't relational. There was something special to it. And they were like, well, we want to use this database because of something. And we're on AWS. So let's go to the whiteboard and talk about it. And that whole interview was like me asking them questions. I go, well, what do you think we should do? Like, why do you think this? Because like, I knew I didn't get that job. I knew that I didn't have the answer, as it were. So I tried my darndest to just be collaborative, humble, approachable, curious. Because if it goes well and that company is looking for that, then cool. And then if it doesn't go well, then that's an indicator that that's not a fit, right? Like, if that's the person they want that can do that exercise, then I'm not that person.
Yeah, I think that's a difficult thing when interviewing to recognize too, especially in the moment, especially if you have any emotions tied up in the interview process. Like, sometimes there are roles that individuals just not a good fit for, right? And I think the frustrating part is there's often not a lot of closure other than kind of a cold rejection email. But if you're able to recognize that of, oh, it's not a me thing, it's that effect that there's skills that they need that I don't possess, right? And that's perfectly fine, right?
Yeah. And I realize as you collect that insight, that I also speak from a position of privilege, because I've never, as long as I've been in tech at least, I've never worried about getting a job. There was always a job that I could get. So I can only imagine how fraught it is if you need a job and you're going into an interview. It's very difficult to be like cool and fun and collaborative when like you need a job to live. So like all my advice goes out the window when there's actual stakes, because of my privilege, because of the place I've come from.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. That's the other, I mean, even this whole show, right? The difficult part of it is, it's trying to get advice from different types of folks and different individuals, because everyone's perspective is different and everyone's experience is different, right? Going through any interview process, right? And just trying to share insights into a whole variety, right? Because certainly some people go, oh, getting a job is easy, right? Versus this is the hardest part of engineering, is getting the job, right? In some people's minds. So it's a whole spectrum.
Most definitely.
Do you have other tips? I mean, those are certainly some great ones of trying to be humble and curious and collaborative. And I think those are ones that I lean on um, that are very common trends throughout
Mhm.
people that have been on the show. I mean, any other tips that you have for engineers that are going into technical interviews?
I mean, um, there was a, a coding academy, a boot camp in town that has since gone out of business and pivoted. But Mobile Makers used to be upstairs from Vokal, the agency I worked with. And I would go up there and I gave a talk at the end of the semester for a couple of years, I think. Mentored. Some of the best engineers I worked with came out of there. But I would give this talk, how get job, and with the disclaimer that this like I said a moment ago, this is out of my position of privilege. Like me, a tall white guy getting a job. Well, tall is generous. Relatively tall is entirely like I don't know. So like I do my best. But I would stand up and I would say like it's a 3-step process. Like do stuff, meet people, and be cool. So do stuff, have some sort of portfolio. It doesn't have to be a lot, but like have something. For mobile, it might be an app in the App Store. For web development, it might be like a simple service or a front end or like just something. Because like as a hiring manager, I know I see thousands of those same cookie cutter tutorials in people's GitHubs, which is fine. But I know that you can follow along in the tutorial. Like show me your personality, show me something.
Yeah.
One candidate a long time ago, I told you the front end exercise was hit an API and render um, the list. So this candidate, we didn't end up hiring, but I still keep her in mind, and for any job, she took the list, and or our demo account was broken. We had forgot to like renew it or something. So instead of complaining, though, she made another trial account with ActiveCampaign and set it up with demo data from the Avengers, put Avengers characters into the database,
Yeah.
and then queried that to render it on screen, and then themed the whole thing. So it was like snail mail, and there was a little snail CSS animation going around the thing, and there were the Avengers thing, and she put Gravatars in. And I was like, this is her personality. Like, it's, she showed off what she could do. But anyway, step one, do stuff, have some sort of portfolio. Step two is meet people. That's very hard in COVID times, but
Yeah.
all the people I know that got jobs, well, that's what is that bias? All the people I know that got jobs because I know them. All the jobs I got were through friends or friends of friends. Like the social network is incredibly valuable if somebody can refer you. So like just find a way to meet people somehow. And
Yeah.
For entry level people, I think we've talked about this before. I've been surprised if you just sort of message somebody on LinkedIn and say like, "Hey, could we talk about computers?" A lot of people will say, "Sure."
Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, the be cool advice is a little tongue in cheek, but like people want to work with nice people. So find a way to be, as we've said many times now, humble, collaborative, excited, interested. Like, because once you get the interview, if you can be somebody that they want to work with, then you're in. So for whatever that's worth, do stuff, meet people, be cool has been my stock advice for a long time.
Yeah, I mean that's great, and that's something the meet people. I think that's a difficult part for a lot of people, right? A lot of people think I know I got to build something, right? And once I learn how to code, I can put something together, right? And then the actual meeting people, it almost feels like a whole new skill set, right? And when I worked at Actual as helping bootcamp graduates get their first job for several years, and that was the part that think it was a difficult realization for a lot of people of like, oh, I just learned how to code. Now I have to learn how to talk about what I do, and like two strangers, right? If they weren't necessarily super comfortable about talking to strangers. And but that's, I mean, very accurate of if you message people and say, hey, I'm getting started in this, I built this thing, right? I love to chat with you. Like maybe you have any feedback on it, or like just can you share more about what your job is like, right? Those types of conversations. gotta have a lot of them, right? To learn, and you gotta pull different bits of information. But when I was first starting to code, I think I spoke to 40, 50 people, and my first job actually came out of that, right? Just one of those conversations. And I got some really great advice. I also got some maybe questionable advice, but speaking to a lot of people let me see the trends of, okay, these are definitely the things I should focus on, and this is definitely kind of the stuff I should highlight when I'm talking to people, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm laughing so hard because I was definitely in the questionable advice column.
No, I think the questionable advice.
No, it's fine.
Someone told me to study the Linux, an open source, like an open, specifically Linux offshoot open source kernel documentation and source code. And they're like, that's how you'll really know how everything works. And I'm like, I'm sure that is true, but it would just take me 10 years to get from this source code to a web developer role, right?
Yeah.
So that stands out as probably a piece of, maybe I would have passed that advice along to people.
Yeah. I mean, you never know. That's the problem with giving advice,
Yeah. And I'm sure that's how that person got their first job. So, to them, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Great. Well, usually I ask if there's any different advice for early career engineers, but I think that stuff is, very much geared towards early career engineers anyways. Any other horror stories before we, as we come to the close of the first half here and move into the technical, any other horror stories? The Groupon one, I think, fits in that category for sure. Any other stories you want to share from interviewing in the past on either side of the table? Maybe a positive one if you have something else.
How much are you going to edit this? Because I don't know if this is approachable, but a couple, it's been months now, but I'm very happy at ActiveCampaign. I have no interest in leaving, but I'll take a call, and I was talking to an early stage startup, a very exciting SaaS, God, what were they? It was SaaS for some sort of finance thing. So fintech and SaaS. Oh, wow, that's exciting. Sure. And at a director, VP level, they scheduled a call, and I thought it would be a friendly chat. And I got on the call, and the CTO says, "I'd like to share your screen now. I have a code pen thing set up. I'd like to do a technical exercise." And I immediately, I couldn't leave the building because it was on Zoom, but I was like, good on you. If that's what you want in a director, then more power to you. And we had a little discussion about should directors write code. And I was like, for me, in my career, it's not really right for me, but I more power to you. If I bump into anybody, I'll send them your way. But that was supremely awkward.
Yeah.
It was just expectation setting, have an agenda for the event before you show up.
Totally. And that's, I think on both sides, you can always ask, what should I expect to prepare? Some companies will give you more insightful info than others. And then, as the company sharing, this is what you will be doing in this interview, right? If nothing else, gives people the study guide for the interview, right? Instead of, it could be any type of interview, at least point them in the right direction, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You show up and you're just like, what are we going to do here? Expectations, whether recruiting or anything in life, I just say expectations over and over again. Because if you know what you're in store for, if you know what's coming up, then, no problem. But, people in general don't like surprises, don't like to be disappointed. So I try my best. Maybe there's somebody listening to this that interviewed with me in the past, but I do try my best to set expectations all along the process to make sure that it's as painless as possible for everybody.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, we'll take a quick break here, and then we'll move into our second half, okay?
All right, cool. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for watching the first half of the Professional Technical Interviewee. The technical interview will be released 1 week from this episode, so be sure to subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. New episodes are released on the first 4 Thursdays of each month. Find us on YouTube at youtube.com/Dorsett or on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. And remember, keep practicing.